Hi and welcome to this Truesec Extra news broadcast that we're sending out here in the middle of old vacation time, because we've been deep in the trenches for the last couple of days dealing with this whole Kaseya incident. So many companies have been affected by this, and we wanted to share the knowledge and the insight that we have. It's not going to be a forensics deep dive, so if you are a forensic person and totally excited about hearing the nitty-gritties, we're not going to disclose any O-days here. This is going to be a briefly conversation around what we have learned so far, so managers and IT pros and everyone else can get an insight in what's happening. So today I got Fabio and Rasmus with me, and we're gonna see if we can enable those guys here. And yeah, here we go. Here are the fellas. And oh, and here's a really big me. That was not intended. Okay, that's
the live effect, right?
That's the live effect. Amazing though. So Rasmus, Fabio, you guys been. I mean, the lack of sleep and the deep dives, it's been really interesting. Fabio, what actually did happen?
Yeah, so we started hearing about this on Friday, right? It was, Kaseya went out with some information, like there was some kind of breach, and they were recommending all their customers to shut down their VSA servers. So we're going to talk about them later, but this was a mass ransomware attack. So it's not your usual type of ransomware attack. You have, normally you have one organization that is affected, right? And all the systems are encrypted. Now we're talking about hundreds, possibly more, organizations around the world that have been almost simultaneously encrypted with the same ransomware, part of the same campaign. And there was, from the very beginning, talks about supply chain attack. And I guess to some extent, we can still consider it a supply chain attack. We can get back to this question later as well. But yeah, so there's been some kind of compromise of Kaseya that's been used to, not Kaseya directly, but their product, the VSA server. And that's been used to push out ransomware to a lot of different organizations. That's basically the very high level view of what happened. Yeah, well, Fredrik, you're not here anymore, but I guess we take it from here then. Rasmus, we have a lot of different organizations affected, right? So tell us a bit more about how it works.
Yeah, right. So who's affected by this? So we know they're targeting the Kaseya VSA server, and we're going to talk a bit about that soon. But what we know is that if you have a device that is using Kaseya, an agent, to monitor that device as the product is intended to be used, and that is in contact with the central Kaseya VSA server that has been affected, that is generally what's considered, then your system is at risk, essentially. That is kind of how the chain has happened. We're going to dig into more about that. So what we know about is that there's different numbers all over the place. Some are saying 40 MSPs, some have said 20 MSPs, some have said hundreds of this companies, some have said thousands of companies. I don't think anyone has the full, complete view of where this will really end up, right? No one really knows how big or how many organizations has been impacted, but it's for sure a lot. We know that much.
Yeah, and just
like
to give a bit more
servers live, right?
Yeah. In terms of, in terms of systems, we at least have directly confirmed several thousands. Yes. In terms of how many organizations, that is a much bigger topic. That's much harder to answer, and that will probably take a while for the entire world to really figure out approximately where we landed at.
Yeah, exactly. And just to give a bit more context on what this VSA server is, basically, so Kaseya VSA is a product, and there is an on-prem version of that. So you run that server on your on-prem environment, and as a customer of Kaseya, this is typically used by MSPs to manage large fleet of computers. So typically, an MSP uses Kaseya VSA to manage all of their clients' computers. And that is often done with one or a few VSA servers that are used to manage well, all of their clients or big chunks of their clients. So that creates a dependency in itself, right? So if you take over that VSA server, you have access directly to all of the clients managed by that VSA server. Um, um, yeah, so so that's how this got spread to different organizations, because that was the component that was compromised in the first place.
So what was the initial compromise? How did this work? What happened?
Yeah, so initially there was some thoughts that it could be that Kaseya itself was compromised and we used to deliver malicious updates to the VSA servers in a supply chain attack. That turned out not to be the case. What happened really was that the VSA servers themselves, so the on-prem VSA servers, some of them were exposed to internet directly, and the threat actor had a zero-day, so an previously unknown vulnerability in the product, and they used it to execute code on it. This is a zero-day, so we can't really disclose too much. We did identify the exact exploit, and we are sending information to Kaseya about that, so we can help them with creating a patch for that. But basically, it's actually multiple flaws that are chained together. So as an unauthenticated user from the internet, you can reach this exposed service on the VSA servers, and in a couple of different steps, execute your code on it. So that's how they got compromised. We have some kind of high-level detail, high-level detail on our blog, just to highlight a couple of components of the vulnerability. But we're not disclosing details. That will come later, I guess, together with a patch, or anyway, we're going to coordinate this in a responsible way.
Yeah, we don't want to leak any 0 days payloads here. That would be nice. I've got a question though. What's the impact, the whole impact of this? For people that got exposed, like say that your VSA service is compromised, and now ransomware is just rolling out. Could you walk me through the chain?
Yeah, so I mean, talking about the chain, right? So you have this compromise of the internet exposed VSA servers. What the threat actor did after they managed to execute code was to start a script. Well. They ran code through the web application, and that one was used to start some scripts that will interact directly with the Kaseya application to push out a certain procedure or an agent update, depends how you want to call it, but it's part of the functionality of the application to be able to push out procedures to all the managed agents. These agents run on the computers that are managed by this solution. So what they did is simply they run they run this script on all the managed clients, and that triggered a file copy and an execution of a script to all the managed clients. So that's how they ended up infecting all of these systems. The VSA server themselves have not been encrypted. They've just been used to deliver this to all the managed clients.
Yeah, and then so go into then the what happens then on the end devices, because we've covered now and spoken about Kaseya, VSA, and how it comes from the outside through Kaseya and then forward, right, to the end systems. In many cases, point of sale systems or servers or any type of device really that is used by this or has an Kaseya agent that is communicating with an impacted or infected Kaseya VSA server. Right, so it receives these instructions, as Fabio said, and this has been published a bit all over the place, but it's a couple of steps that it takes in terms of copying files and running some scripts, or at least it's trying to run a chain of commands. And without saying or digging deep into exactly what's happening, but in short, you can summarize it that it's trying to disable antivirus. It is trying to use some techniques to hide how they are executing things, to start a particular binary, which in turn then is going to start another binary, which in turn is going to load another one, a DLL file, which is then the final ransomware. So there's a couple of layers of execution here that takes place mostly to detect different types of evasion or detection techniques like antivirus or similar. And when you're looking at a system then, So if we talk briefly of, so my system has been encrypted. What does that mean for me? Well, the first part is that we want to know what's the state of our machine, right? Is it encrypted? Has it something run on it or attempted to be run on it? And just to summarize that, if malicious code has run on it, or especially if it's encrypted, the general recommendation is to reinstall it. That's the better option, or that's the concrete option, or that you would want to go for. But we know also that many are coming and asking, can it works anyway? Can I use it? And then if we talk a little bit about that, we're gonna dig into that soon. Actually, talk a little bit about what you should do if you have been affected. But that is a state that many find themselves in. That we know that the system has been encrypted, but to what extent? We look at it. What we know that because of the way this was exploited, like Fabio just mentioned, that means that there could be different versions of the ransomware. So far, most have been talking about a particular hash value that has been seen in most places. So far, it seems to be similar in most places. But since we don't know everything or the full scale, and we know the way it was executed, we know there's the possibility that there could be different versions of the ransomware, meaning there could be different types of executions. The ones that we know of, the ones we've seen so far, things such as, is the ransomware persistent in the way that it's going to rerun on its own? It's not configured to do that as we know it today and as the public know it today. We also know that it's not spreading network-wise by itself, that it's targeting network shares by itself. That's also something we know from our analysis and from what's known in the public right now. We also know that that if you restart your machine to try to get things up and running, because the ransomware also has built-in function to try to stop services and kill things such as SQL and similar. It's trying to stop services to be able to encrypt files. And we know that if you restart the device, which some have attempted to do, there is a big variation in what will happen. In the case it will be fine. In some cases it resulted in the system won't start at all. Usually that is because the boot manager, the files related to booting, essentially, or starting the machine, has also been encrypted, usually because of the way the system has been configured. So you're kind of in a state where because of the multiple layers of execution and the unique configurations per system, your system will behave slightly different depending on how it has hit yours. And that is a situation that you kind of find yourself in when you have a system in front of you or accessible to you that has been in some way impacted.
Okay, so what should you do? Let's say that this happened. We know what the impact is. We know how it works. Like you said, not all computers have been wiped all the way through, because apparently the malware just stopped in some cases. What would be your recommendation for somebody in that situation? Is it safe to run it?
Are you talking about? I mean, there are a couple of different layers here, right? So you may have a VSA server that is affected, or you can be an organization with ransomware computers from that VSA server. When we talk about a VSA server, well, obviously, if you haven't already done it, turn it off, or at the very least disconnect the network, and also conduct a thorough investigation or calling some expert to do that. Because, like we're saying, I mean, these were all directly compromised from the internet, right? And as far as we've seen, these attacks have been consistent. So the indicators we have so far, they match with the other research teams around the world so far. But we don't know. I mean, we cannot know for sure at this point that there isn't maybe one or two or some VSA servers that were exploited to conduct something else that we don't know. So if you haven't done an investigation, you really should, no matter what's the status of your other systems.
I get it, but I'm still interested, because these are also affecting a lot of MSPs, right? Some people are running these to manage systems, and maybe it's not even your own server. You're using a third party to somebody manage your stuff, and then all your stuff get wiped. But it didn't wipe everything. Is it safe to keep on running as a small SMB or somebody that doesn't have their own infrastructure?
Yeah, so like Rasmus was saying, based on all the systems we have analyzed so far, we haven't seen any sign of additional backdoors or additional activities that the malware does, either allowing the threat actor to do further manual operations or more automated stuff that can be executed by the malware itself. We haven't seen any sign of that. The only thing that it does is drops those couple of binaries that Rasmus talked about, and it starts them, so that triggers the Revolt ransomware to encrypt the system. That's basically what it does. It doesn't move around on its own. Basically, I mean, you can reinstall the system. If you have data that has not been encrypted, it's possible to take that data. You still need to be very careful about what you copy out. So still recommend you call in an expert that does that. But it should be possible, if the data is not encrypted, to just get it out and put it on a new freshly installed system. But again, that should be done in a controlled manner. So don't just copy stuff without really knowing what you're copying. So that's the general answer. Then, I mean, it's, of course, each case will have to be investigated individually, but as a general recommendation, you know, if it's encrypted, well, then it's encrypted. You should reinstall it. I mean, there is, of course, you know, the option to pay. We normally consider that, you know, not even a possibility, but we understand it could be potential cases where that's kind of the only way. And that becomes a different type of discussion, like not necessarily about this case, right? Should you pay or should you not pay, and then the impact and the consequences of that. And I don't know if that's in scope for this forum now here to discuss. I guess I could talk for hours about it, I think. So
Well, let's have another one where we talk about the ethical or the idea around why you shouldn't pay. I'm a strong believer personally that you shouldn't, because I don't want to fuel the industry. But that's another story. That's not what we're talking about here. So if you have been affected, what should you do, and what's your action plan? And do you have any takeaways before we head into answering the questions?
Before we and as we go into that, there's multiple ways at identifying if you have been affected or not. There is some ways from the Kaseya perspective or from the Kaseya VSA server perspective, and there's some ways from the affected systems perspective. I don't know, do you want to cover the Kaseya server perspective first, Fabio?
Sure. So there are different indicators that are left on the system to figure out if it's been compromised or not. Now, we've also seen in the exploit that we have identified that they have cleared logs and evidence at multiple in multiple stages or at multiple levels. So you know, the IS logs are gone, and the other types of logs inside the application database itself are also deleted. There are still logs that you can use to track what the VSA server has pushed out to managed clients. But that is, again, assuming that it is the same type of version of exploit that we've seen in the cases that we investigated so far. So in general, you should do a thorough investigation no matter what, like I said before. And there are indications to identify what systems have been targeted from that VSA server. So there are logs.
Yeah, and then if we look then on the affected systems machine, you have the more obvious case that the machine is encrypted. You will have README files kind of all over the place in most folders that have been targeted. Some folders and some files will be whitelisted by the ransomware and therefore not encrypted. But you have README files almost everywhere on the system that tells you that yes, you've been encrypted and includes the encryption, the note basically from the ransomware itself. And you will also see that encrypted files will have the file extension changed with the same combination of numbers and letters as the README file. So that on its own is a relatively clear indicator that the ransomware has executed here. You also have some registry keys that are also known since before. Black Lives Matter is one of the registries keys created that tracks and stores data related to the ransomware, data related to the keys that are used and so on. So that is the obvious case. It's encrypted. The other case is that there could be files on the system, but they haven't successfully executed in some way. So you could have the ransomware laying on the system, or some parts of that's part of the execution chain that are laying there that hasn't completed fully. So there could be some variations of that as well that has been attempted. It could have potentially started the encrypted things but then got stopped midway. You can also have the case where, because one of the first things that happens is that there's PowerShell execution that disables antivirus functionality like Windows Defender and so forth. That is another layer of things that you might end up in a case where you have no files present, but antivirus and so forth has been disabled because the first part ran, maybe to a certain extent, or maybe didn't fully function. But you have these different situations, different layers that in any way, in some way, this malicious code has run to some extent on your system. You do also have certain agent logs on the system itself that can help you indicate if a command has been sent or tried to execute by this particular system as well. So you have multiple layers and multiple variations things can be affected in. And based on what we mentioned previously about how the ransomware operates and so forth, several have asked us, can you still run an encrypted system? What's the effect on the data and so forth? And as we know it, that this is a system that a threat actor has run code on. We have seen some cases of that, and so far that's been consistent in everything we have looked at. Doesn't mean that's the only thing that could have happened. It depends on your Kaseya VSA server. That's going to tell what's been executed for you, or then also in the logs for your particular machine will also help identify what's been executed for you. That will help you know what's really the case for you. And we also know that, we mentioned previously, that it doesn't target network devices. We also, from what we have seen, that it doesn't target secondary disks on the same system. So it encrypts the operating system disk, but not the secondary disk if you have one, or a third for that matter. So if you have a data disk, for example, that is likely not to be infected based on what the samples we have seen so far.
Interesting. So we got a bunch of questions coming in. If you guys are ready for it, let's smash up those in. You're up for it?
Sure.
Cool. Okay. So let's do so. Sabina had a question here. What do you think about the difficult situation? Will Kaseya lose customers now?
It's I guess it's similar to most of these cases. Will some people be scared? Probably yes. Will some? I think it also depends a lot how the world reacts as it starts to finally unfold. Usually, what we're seeing is the companies that are transparent, open, and detailed about what they're sharing are the ones that are better off in the end. Yes, they take an initial hit, but they are better off at the end. So I think it will also depend a bit on how everything unfolds. But so far they were fast on instructing to shut down systems, and they took some quick action. So that is at least an indication of willingness to be open. So we'll see kind of how that unfolds. But will it have some type of impact? Probably, but I don't think anyone really knows to what extent yet.
They are also the victim in this.
Yeah, exactly. But like you're saying, I mean, they've been very transparent and very quick in handling this from an outside perspective. So I think, I mean, that is always an opportunity to gain some trust with your customer base, and I think they acted in a great way. So there has been a lot of other cases, right, where we've seen that, like you're saying, if transparency pays off normally.
Yeah. We got another one from Marcus Einarsson here. Is access to a VSA server all you need to access the client systems? Isn't there a per client authentication needed to move from VSA server to client environment?
So once you're in the application with full rights to the application, then any agent that reports to that system, you can push stuff to it. Now, I don't know off the top of my head if there is functionality within the VSA server itself to kind of create that restriction. However, if it's done from one server, obviously you can't do that, right? Whether there are extra steps to take or not, what you need is already there. I guess then the discussion is from a more like architecture and design perspective, because this is obviously a single point of failure, right, or a central dependency for all those clients. So I guess it's more about how you design the management of your clients. But if you've done it that way, then yes, that's all you need.
Jonas asked us if there's a known EDR AV that can detect and maybe stop the infection on the clients.
Well, the infection on the clients is these samples that are known, right? You have this agent file, and then you have this DLL that runs FreeWall. I mean, I would expect by now pretty much all the AVs in the world will have those signatures. At the time of the initial infection, we don't know exactly how many would have detected it, but it was normally not detected. So that is a... Also, I mean, if you talk about an EDR has more capabilities in that sense. And then depending on the product itself, it can also be configured to immediately stop or terminate processes or isolate device, depending on the product. Or just raise an alert to hopefully a SOC that is looking at the alerts, right? But this was a bit weird situation because it's not like you had an infection, then some spreading, and then some activities, and then eventually the ransomware, like a typical ransomware case. Here, from a client perspective, you have software is already running there. You have the VSA agent running on it. That's legitimate software. And then all of a sudden, you just get ransomware running. There is nothing in between, pretty much. So it's really hard to actually detect and stop this because you can't even really talk about suspicious behavior, because the agent does updates all the time. So that's not an anomaly that an EDR would react to normally. So it's very tricky. When you trust software that is already running on your system, if that software suddenly becomes malicious, it's very hard to do something about it if you don't know about this before.
That's true. Yeah. John Miles did ask, or Millis, he asked, how do the threat actor manage to find so many vulnerable servers? Were they simply looking for exposed servers on the internet? We don't really know this answer. We are not the attackers, but in theory, what would you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first question is, how do they find the zero day, right? There is actually discussions now and information that there was reports earlier. So someone, I can't remember exactly what it was actually now, but someone has reported to Kaseya some vulnerabilities in the product. I don't know exactly if it's the same vulnerability that was used here as the one that was reported. But anyway, Kaseya was working on a patch. We're actually in the process of testing that patch, according to them. Again, I don't know if it was the same exact exploit. So if it was, that's an interesting coincidence, and who knows? To be honest, looking at the vulnerability, which again we can't disclose yet, it's I mean, it's not necessarily that hard to find. However, it does require some kind of insight. So it could be that the threat actor had access to a VSA server and they could just check the code and reverse some DLLs and some other files and find the vulnerability. But once they found it, then yes, I would assume that they just did a broad recon through internet, find all the exposed VSA servers, build that nice list ready to just launch, and then work on creating the payloads and all the automation for that, and preparing the Revolt ransomware package through the ransomware as a service thing, and then just push a button and go through the list. That's I think that's probably how it went through. What's interesting also to think about here is that imagine having access to all of those systems. You can, of course, choose to do what they did here, right? And that's one way to handle this access. You just ransomware them all. But you could also think, maybe they did choose a few very interesting targets before to do something else, and then this is just the last part of the attack. That's why I'm saying, if you have a VSA server that was exposed to internet, but you don't even have a known compromise, do a thorough investigation.
Yeah, just make sure that it's not somebody just in there stealing your stuff, looking at things.
Or has been before this happened.
You done an extension to the previous question as well. That was kind of what you said now, Fabio. Like, once you've identified the expected behavior of a Kaseya system on a particular IP, on a particular port, it's usually relatively easy to find a similar type of behavior all over the internet and then build yourself that target list, like you mentioned. And I also wanted to add, we do have on the question of EDR, EDR or AV, we have several cases where the AV has actually, after a while or midway or at the beginning of things, actually stopped things. The result has been very mixed, but there has been some cases where AV has been successful, since in the end, the files are being encrypted. So
beautiful.
So somewhere along the way, there are some products that have stopped it to a varying degree of success.
Yet another win for the blue team. Awesome. That makes me happy. Dick has a question here. What would your recommendation be to the organization, depending on the solution, similar to Kaseya? There's a bunch of them, right? And SolarBin's, but want to do it in a safer way, as this wasn't the first and absolutely not the last time this would happen.
Yeah, I don't think there is a very easy answer to that, because obviously we live in a world now where we have dependencies or digital dependencies on a lot of different parties, components, companies, software, cloud solutions, all kinds of stuff. So it's very hard. But I think it's more of a mindset also that then triggers some kind of work you should do beforehand. Like if you kind of think that this I mean, just imagine it will happen. Do you have a plan to handle it? And can you somehow split up that risk? Like maybe don't rely just on one vendor, for example, is a way to reduce a risk. You know, having that type of thought while you handle your risk management and decide what type of vendors to use, what type of software to use. Then, of course, choosing the software itself is also it's part of the equation here. Then, of course, you know, even big vendors get compromised and used for supply chain attack or similar attacks. So it's very hard. I don't have a great answer right now, to be honest. But having detection capabilities is definitely something that that we will recommend in any case. Like we said before, this is a special case because you just got ransomware all of a sudden. There is zero time for detection, since the Kaseya server is normally not part of your systems, right? So you have no chance to see it before. But in general, having detection capabilities, normally we talk about EDRs a lot because that they see what happens on the endpoint. And then you need to have a SOC, a 24/7 SOC with people that actually understand how to read that and how to interpret the alerts and so on, and how to respond to that. That is usually the most effective way you have to identify something bad goes on in the environment. And then whoever looks at that also need to be aware of these types of attacks. Just because something bad or something suspicious has been triggered by by legitimate software that is normally trusted, doesn't mean that it's not an attack. Maybe it is an attack that uses supply chain attack.
A very crude comparison that could be made is essentially the resulting effect is a domain controller. If you think a typical Windows environment, a domain controller available from internet where you could create a GPO unauthenticated to launch something everywhere. That's a very crude. It's one central point of failure, internet exposed, that can access everything. If you have that setup, that need for that setup, yeah, you can't have local VPN, networks or VPN connections everywhere. For example, we know Kaseya is, for example, used as an alternative to reach systems that are on remote locations, which are hard to see or hard to access. End result in this case, you have something internet exposed, which is a central piece of system or software that can access a lot of systems at once. And once you have that, you have a dependency on that particular machine. That is the end result you end up in.
We're going to finish off here with one last question, or more like a question. What do you think would be some of the consequences of this attack? We can only killgissa and speculate here, so feel free to guess away. What would be the consequences of this attack?
I mean, I think obviously ransomware has been all over the place and it's been raising for quite a while now, right? So I think this just adds to that. And there are a lot of different activities that has that are being done around the world to try and fight this harder. We work a lot with affected organization all the time. We work a lot with, with trying to prevent this in the first place and all of that. And a lot of other organizations are doing the same. If we talk about impact or consequence of this particular attack, you have different perspectives. You have the Kaseya perspective, you have the customer's perspective. I think this will make people think a bit more about the dependencies of their software. But then again, we had a great example of that when the SolarWinds happened just a few months back. So I think this just builds on top of that. Off the top of my head right now, I can't think of anything really particular as a consequence to this.
It was still, it was still a zero day. Whenever there's a zero day in the mix, then there is a less push on a particular person at fault. In that sense, it's not in the same sense that you can put all blame on one individual and that's going to be the consequence of it. So, since we're talking zero days, we're talking things that were unknown. No one was aware of these things, right? So that puts the perspective. But the other thing that also puts things into perspective, which is especially true here in Sweden, is that this has resulted in an impact on end consumers or non-IT people or half the country in Sweden particularly. So it creates another, it's all of a sudden that IT system that me as a non-IT person did not care about, I'm just there to buy my things, all of a sudden that affected me. And that will also cause the voices of more people to be raised or heard, because now all of a sudden it starts affecting people more and in a more concrete or direct way. In that sense, that is probably one part of the consequence that we'll see from this as well.
I totally agree. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me for this quick update and our report directly from the trenches. I'm looking forward for us to be able to disclose some more information about this vulnerability itself as soon as it's responsible to do so. But until then, head over to the Truesec blog, like and subscribe on the YouTube channel, because we're going live here again as soon as possible. We got more stuff coming. And other than that, thank you for tuning in and have a good start of the week. Take care.